Francesca O'Brien and Councillor Angela O'Connor. They hopefully will be with us before the end, but they're actually at another meeting.
I have apologies from Councillors Beth Hopkins and Adam Davis.
Okay, are there any others that people know about? Okay, disclosures, if there are any, please let Michelle know and she'll email you out the template for completion. As you know, it's the prohibition of whip votes. And the next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any comments on those? If not, could I have a proposer that they be accepted? There we are, Councillor Mike Day. There we are. Thank you very much. The letters from the previous meetings to note. And item 6, gosh, the agenda, we're going through this agenda pretty fast. Item 6, public question time. There are no public questions. So we're immediately on to item 7, and this was deferred from the last meeting. And I'm delighted to welcome back for a second occasion, as of in 2 months, Kate Phillips, and the cabinet member, obviously, Councillor Robert Smith and Helen Morgan-Rees, our director. Robert, Helen, do you want to say something before I hand over to Kate?
Yes, just to introduce the item, if I can, Chair. I think the priorities are there listed under item 1 of the strategy: promoting attendance, promoting inclusion, embedding universal whole school provision while ensuring sufficient places, embedding a shared inclusion ethos, and emotional health and psychological well-being, and developing whole school approaches there. I think under each of these headings there is progress and good progress to report, but that's not to say that we're not without our challenges both of implementation and also, of course, the challenges of demand, the increasing demand and the changing nature of demand across Swansea, and as indeed across wider society. So I think all of these are impacted by different influences, and a large number of them call for us to work with partners, with other agencies and other organisations to deliver what we want to deliver. So I think with those words of introduction, I'll hand over to the officers who perhaps can take us through the report and probably come back later, Chair.
Thank you very much, Robert. Right, is it Kate kicking off?
Yeah, sure, if that's okay. So if it's okay, I'll talk you through the report. So the purpose of the report is to provide a briefing on the progress in relation to the Vulnerable Learners Service Inclusion Strategy, which has the 5 priorities that Councillor Smith has just outlined. But there was also a specific request to include an update on the behaviour strategy. So I'll provide some additional detail around that at the end of the report, which touches in more detail on the work we're doing there. So just as a bit of background, the Vulnerable Learners Service covers a range of services for vulnerable learners. So that includes the Additional Learning Needs and Inclusion Team, Maestero Pupil Referral Unit, services for pupils educated other than at school, the Home Tuition Team, our Pupil Engagement Team, which includes promoting inclusion and reducing exclusion, school admissions, looked after children, Education Welfare Service, and Education Safeguarding and Child Protection. So we know that some learners are identified as vulnerable because they have a specific additional learning need or personal situation, for example, children who are looked after. But I think it's really important as well to emphasise that all children and young people can become vulnerable at any point in time and experience periods of vulnerability. So it's really important that we have whole service, whole school approaches that would support any child who finds themselves in a position of needing additional support. So creating an education system which is inclusive and responsive to need is critical in meeting needs and ensuring all children and young people have the best chance to access opportunities and progression. So the strategy for inclusion was agreed by Cabinet in May 2023, and it aims to bring together the key priorities across all areas of the Vulnerable Learners Service, and indeed incorporate other elements of multi-agency working. So as Councillor Smith has outlined, the priorities are in the report, so I won't read them out again. But it's also worth noting that within the priority of inclusion, there's a current work stream focusing on developing a revised behaviour strategy for Swansea schools. And this work is also being considered as part of the Education Service Transformation Committee. So I've provided additional detail around that at the end of the report. Firstly, I'll give you a brief update on each of the 5 priorities. So in relation to promoting attendance, attendance does remain challenging. However, since 2022, there's been slow but steady increase in attendance across sectors of the across all sectors of education in Swansea. So the improving picture has been supported by the work of our Education Welfare Service, and there was a full review and restructure in relation to that team's work to ensure that the service is able to work in the most effective way possible. So our schools are now supported with individual action plans, and for some schools with the most challenging attendance rates, we've been able to support via a family engagement grant. And this has meant that family engagement officers have been appointed by schools, and they meet regularly with our Education Welfare Service colleagues to ensure that they move away from punitive approaches wherever possible and focus on learner welfare using trauma-informed approaches and considering appropriate responses to emotionally based school avoidance, because all of our research and data tells us that that's the primary reason why children are struggling to attend school. In relation to the priority around promoting inclusion, this is about reducing exclusions from school and minimising the use of part-time timetables unless they're being part of a planned reintegration strategy. So in line with national trends, there has been an increase in the number of fixed-term and permanent exclusions over the last 5 years in Swansea. And we recognise that there are a number of factors that have contributed to this, and they include but aren't limited to the impact of the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, an increase in the number of learners with additional learning needs and learners who are neurodiverse. And these factors have in turn contributed to a reduced emotional health and well-being, and that in turn can create more emotional responses to environments, and they can be perceived as challenging behaviours. But when I detail a bit more around the work we're doing on the behaviour strategy, what we want to recognise is that those societal and demographic changes actually require a different response or a different environment for learners. And that's really why we're undertaking the work around revising our behaviour strategy for school. And it's really important that we do that with our multi-agency partners. And the work is the focus of the Service Transformation Committee as well, which is an important input and oversight for us. So I'll talk now about the strand around embedding our effective universal or whole school provision while also supporting sufficient specialist places. So this is around provision for children with additional learning needs. And there's been significant progress in relation to this priority. So it's about achieving the right balance between supporting learners in their local schools via whole school and targeted approaches wherever possible, but also recognising that for some learners, a more specialist provision is also required. So the priority has been progressed via our SDF Specialist Teaching Facility Review. It's been a very extensive piece of work. It's been ongoing for a 4-year period, and we've had extensive stakeholder engagement and co-design, which has resulted in a set of proposals to remodel and redesignate the STF offer in Swansea. And the proposals include redesignation of 5 specialist teaching facilities, a change of specialism for 3 STFs, opening 5 new specialist teaching facilities and expanding a further 4, and also closing 5 specialist teaching facilities. So we've taken that to consultation. The net gain will be 61 additional places if the proposals proceed. The consultation period has ceased, and the report has been considered by Swansea Cabinet. This report is delayed from the previous scrutiny meeting. It's actually been to Cabinet this morning, so the outcome will be known soon. And in addition to the work supporting the increase of specialist places, there's also been significant work undertaken to support the universal or whole school offer. That's really important, so that we know that children are supported in their local schools wherever possible, and that the graduated response, the access to a specialist place, is once that those strategies have been effectively used. So we've had focus on capacity building and using in-reach, outreach offers to support both learners but also professional development for the staff in schools. So the work has included a pilot cluster enhanced provision model in the Dylan Thomas cluster. So the pilot's ongoing at the time of reporting. We need it to run for a minimum of an academic year to really effectively measure its impact. But what it does is provide short-term interventions for learners and specialist advice professionals on an in-reach, outreach basis. We've also established a sensory resource base at Grange Primary School, which provides new opportunities for learners with sensory impairment, and the base will also offer training opportunities for school professionals. We've opened a new Welsh medium additional learning needs provision in Ysgol Bryn Iago, which will support learners with additional learning needs through the medium of Welsh and provide a transition to the new STF model in Welsh medium primary, if that's agreed, following the STF consultation and statutory notice period. That's a really exciting development for us, because that's quite groundbreaking in Swansea in terms of Welsh medium provision. And our Pennerbryn Special School are working with the Additional Learning Needs and Inclusion team to provide outreach support to our specialist teaching facilities. And we've also commissioned some occupational therapy support for STFs, which has been really successful so far. It's in early stages in terms of its development, but indications are that that's a really effective piece of work which we would like to continue and develop. So while many of the work streams are still in early stages of development, our ongoing monitoring and evaluation are indicating good success initially. So we'll continue to review and also to measure the impact on learners, because that will be our true measure of how they're working. There's a priority. The fourth priority is around embedding a shared inclusion ethos. So the intention for this priority is to support the embedding of ethos around inclusive approaches and a commitment to meeting the needs of vulnerable learners. So the work on the behaviour strategy, which I'll elaborate on in a moment, is an example of this, and it's around agreeing shared, consistent approaches which place learners at the centre, and it's really critical in developing that. The accessibility strategy has recently been approved by Cabinet, and this strategy will support the local authority with the aim of ensuring an inclusive, equitable and positive education experience for all disabled learners. And alongside this strategy, there's been a focus on using the Welsh Government ALN Capital Grant to improve accessibility in schools by making improved physical changes to buildings and purchasing additional resources. So this grant has also been used strategically to support the embedding of an inclusion ethos. The intention was to ensure every school was able to purchase sensory equipment to support learners, and the grant's also been used to future-proof spaces in school for learners with additional learning needs, and that's been aligned to our strategic programmes. We've also used it to purchase minibuses to ensure a more equitable experience for learners with additional needs, particularly in relation to home to school transport, to support our project around providing bespoke transport for our SDF settings. The final priority in the strategy is around emotional health and psychological well-being and the whole school approach. So this priority is primarily led by the Education Psychology Service, but as with all elements of the inclusion strategy, there are important interconnections. So an example of this is the work undertaken in relation to emotionally based school avoidance, EBSA as we refer to it. And while EPS has developed this training package for schools, and they've shared this training and the strategies with the Education Welfare Service, so that's ensuring a consistency in approach between all of those professionals who will be supporting children and young people. The small improvements in attendance and the shift towards a less punitive approach reflect this, and the Education Psychology Service have also led on the development of emotional literacy support assistance (ELSA) programme, and this was initially quite challenging to establish due to recruitment challenges, but we've used assistant EPs quite innovatively to ensure that we're now able to embed ELSA within schools in Swansea. And finally, in relation to that priority, we've had quite a significant milestone in terms of recommissioning the school-based counselling offer. So the commissioning exercise resulted in a new provider who's able to align the services and approaches within the inclusion strategy to the school-based counselling offer, and stakeholders were involved in the process throughout. So that's overseen by the EPU, the Emotional Health and Psychological Wellbeing Forum, which is multi-agency forum. So I just conclude by sharing the additional detail around the work on the behaviour strategy. So that's aligned to the priority around promoting inclusion, but also incorporates elements of all of the other priorities. It's reported nationally that behaviour in schools is becoming more challenging, and this is reflected in Swansea schools and feedback from school-based colleagues. And we know from our data, from our increasing trajectory of exclusions, that we need to have new approaches. So a reference at the beginning of the report around societal and demographic changes which have been identified, and we've run a series of workshops, and these have strengthened the view that the impact of the pandemic, poverty and cost of living crisis, the use of social media, substance use, an increase in violent crimes, recruitment challenges in schools, and challenging budget positions are all contributing towards a landscape that's different from the one that we've been used to previously. We also know that there's an increase in learners with additional learning needs and an increase in neurodiverse learners who require different approaches from those that have been traditionally offered. And we're aware that practice really varies in schools, so it's different in some schools from others. As a local authority, we have a duty to promote high standards of education, and we've got an obligation to support our schools and governing bodies to meet their obligations as well, which are specified under the Education and Inspection Act. And it's also around considering United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, Wellbeing of Future Generations. So there's a lot of legislation, a real framework around our obligations. So we think that we need to develop our behaviour strategy and policy for schools in Swansea to reflect the changes and to better meet those obligations. So the work's going to be co-designed. We're in the process of doing it. It includes schools, but also multi-agency partners. As mentioned, it's being overseen by the Service Transformation Committee, and they've also been valuable contributors to the process. So we've had members of that committee attend our workshops, which has been really welcomed. So we've held 2 multi-agency workshops, actually 3 now, because this report was published for the previous meeting. So there's been a further one since. So we've had over 120 attendees, and they represent a significant breadth of stakeholders, including schools, education officers. We've also had local health board representatives, Public Health Wales, social workers and social services, Welsh Government, committee members, trade unions, and our parent carer forum, as well as others. So a real breadth of experience and input. So the attendees have provided really detailed feedback to 5 key questions, which has been collated and themed, and we've also circulated a questionnaire with the same questions, which has been completed by 22 schools. And the results have all been analysed, themed, and we will test that thinking and the feedback with further workshops. The partnership work's enabled us to be clearer about the issues and the approaches needed to address them. So the emerging feedback is that the key issues are around dysregulation and emotional responses and increased physicality in terms of response. There's a gap between home and school expectations. There's insufficient resource for the local authority to provide support, and children with complex needs and ALN, you'll see complex in inverted commas in the report. There's a kind of technical definition of children with a complex need, but this is what schools are feeding back. They feel the needs have a level of complexity that they're not used to. and they've also identified issues of respect. Some of the approaches that are considered needed are around early intervention and support, training and development, parental involvement and support, consistent policies and procedures, positive reinforcement and relationships, funding and resources, specialist support and training, parental and community engagement, support from external agencies, and consistent and clear guidelines. And that's really helpful for us to have had that feedback from colleagues, because that will help to shape the policy and strategy work. So the next step is to hold follow-up workshops to help begin to design the strategy. And as I said, one of those has already taken place. So we will collate all the findings, we'll reshare with the follow-up, produce a draft policy with our stakeholders, consider producing a toolkit, identifying some best practice. We've identified some expert practitioners via expression of interest process to help support us and identify relevant research, and then draw up a delivery plan. And that work will be overseen by the Service Transformation Committee, with the view to conclude by the end of the financial year. And that's the end of the report.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for that very thorough report, actually, very interesting. Do we have any questions? And we do. Councillor Mike Day.
Thank you, Kate. And just want to say that I'm delighted with hearing about the progress that's being made and the coordination that's taking place in connection with the variety of different measures and so on. I suppose I've got sort of three questions. One would be a fairly broad one, and the other two fairly specific. So the broad one would be, and I'm not looking for an answer here, but what does success look like when you're developing the strategies? What are you putting in place, as it were? How do you actually measure whether these things are working or not? And as I say, I'm not asking for an answer now, but I would be interested, I think, in finding out, as the work on the strategy develops, how that is going to be handled. So, that's a sort of fairly major, significant challenge, isn't it, for us all? Do you measure things in terms of numbers? Clearly, things like attendance and so on can be, but there are other qualitative measures which become quite difficult to put in place. So, not necessarily looking for an answer now, but I would hope that, as things develop and as we hear more about the plans and strategies, that we're able to be told a little bit more about how you and the education community is looking at what success looks like. And, as I said, it's a complex matter. So just leave that one for the moment. The second one is a bit more straightforward. It's great to have the different agencies involved. I just wondered how the pupil voice was being captured, how that's being fed in. Is that through schools, or is that through other mechanisms? Because it's important, isn't it, that their voice is also heard at one point. And the third point then is, I suppose, a challenge for us all. We know that schools are very pressurized in terms of what's expected of them these days. So it's a question of the delivery, but also in relation to how do we manage as an authority at those times when schools aren't in place. So, for example, during the holiday periods, and how are we actually able to maintain the link with the support that's needed for individuals, and also the provision of the appropriate services. And that's where, I suppose, the coordination with other services comes into play. I suppose we've all been horrified at the recent case, haven't we, with a young child having been murdered, and it seems as if that was happening when the child wasn't in school, and either through absenteeism during term time or during holidays. So I was just a little bit kind of concerned, and I'm sure it's an issue which you've all been thinking about, is how you maintain that continuity of service and support to individuals when they're not actually within the school environment. So I'm sorry, there's a few sort of significant ones there, but I'm not necessarily looking for responses immediately, but it would be interesting to have that as a feedback at some point.
Great, thank you,
Sure.
Mike. Kate.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, really helpful. So certainly in terms of what success looks like, you're right. It's a big question, and there'll be a number of different measures. Some of them more straightforward, around attendance, reducing exclusions, and so on. But I think, in relation to your second point about learner voice, how we capture that, how we understand, what school feels like, what the experience of belonging to school communities is for our children and young people. So, it's really helpful to have that. I think we'll incorporate that into some of the work that we're doing. And it's very much about a process of co-design and listening to what all of our kind of agents and participants have to contribute to that. So we'll take that forward in the workshop and make sure we capture that and can bring some of that back. Kind of following on from that in some way in relation to pupil voice, it's really important to us as well that our young people are part of designing this. So the work around this will be part of the big conversation on the 28th of January. We've linked, Helen, my colleague, has linked really effectively with their participation team in Child and Family Services to make sure that we're capturing all of those opportunities to talk to children and young people and to all children and young people. So, particularly the ones who find it harder perhaps to engage with services. So we hear what some of those challenges are and really get a kind of a much deeper understanding of what perhaps we can do collectively to improve that experience, and then make sure that, that we're developing a sense of engagement and belonging for children. And equally, we want to work with families as well. So hear from parents and carers. One of the strong themes that was coming out from the work was the challenges of engaging with families. So maybe we need to do something differently and hear from them what would work effectively for them. And I guess partly answers the third question as well in terms of the support that exists beyond the school day. So this is very much around multi-agency work and partnership working, and about how we can strengthen those opportunities for collaboration and have the lines less precise. So we want to kind of make sure that, that there's a more seamless flow between services around putting the right support in place. So Child and Family Services are great supporters of this work, and they've been important and valuable in terms of their input to the workshops. Equally, it's important that we work with our colleagues in the local health board, with CAMS and with the other agencies as well, and they've all been part of it. So it's and that's complex in itself, that's difficult to achieve, but we should have the ambition to try and do that and to improve the position. So we've got the right people around the table. We just need to make sure that we kind of capture that as best we can.
Okay, great, thank you. Mike, do you want to come back, or you?
No, that's fine. And obviously, when you're looking at a process at one particular point in time, we're not always clear as to where it's going to go and how it's going to unfold. But just heartened by some of the things that Kate has said in relation to recognising some of the points that I was concerned about. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kate. Any other questions? Only one I'd mention, Kate, if I may, is there's lots of really good work going on around attendance in schools across Swansea, and we've seen those on visits we've made as well. Obviously, these are all taking place in different schools. They're all slightly different, but are we sharing those to make sure that that best practice takes place across Swansea? I'm sure we are, but is that the case?
Yeah, so part of the work around the school, developing school action plans for attendance, the family engagement networks, are around identifying that best practice and making sure that we capture it and that we can support schools who are finding it a bit harder, who are struggling a bit, know where to go to find that support. So that's an important element of the work around improving attendance. Absolutely. It's understanding what works and why it's effective, but it's also linked to other elements across the inclusion strategy. So what works well in terms of engaging learners, in terms of developing effective inclusion ethos, will be supportive for children in terms of promoting attendance. So really important for us that we identify that. And part of our behaviour work has been around identifying some practitioners who can help us to strengthen our offer around best practice to make sure that we can quality assure that and be able to share it effectively. So yes, it is important.
Great, thank you. Councillor Robert Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I just want to endorse what Kate said in response to Mike's questions, because I think there is a consensus here about the issues you raised, Mike, whether it's in terms of pupil voice, multi-agency working, ensuring the support is there outside of the school day and of course and during school holiday and so on, and also in terms of making sure that we are working to meaningful indicators of success or failure. I think that's key, that those are we're not just number crunching here, we're dealing with individuals, and the qualitative data is important alongside the quantitative data moving forward. So I think, you know, we're all working on thinking in the same way on this, and I think that's a positive outcome in itself.
Great, thank you. Beth.
Hi, thanks, Kate. It sounds really good what you're working on. I was just going to ask about sort of colleges, because I know sort of Gower College takes 14-year-olds in there. I just wondered how that kind of works. Obviously, they're not a school. I wouldn't have thought they'd have educational psychologists visiting. They don't generally in FE. So how do they fit into this?
Yeah, sure. So if we've got school age children who are attending the college offer, that's part of their offer from their school or from their EOTAS package. So they would still be considered as part of this work because they are children of compulsory school age. So this is kind of covering all of that. We would make sure that they have access to the broader support services. They usually access that provision as part of a wider package of support. So they would be very much included in part of this.
Great, thank you. And next question is from Sandra. The system is obviously working.
Sorry.
Sandra.
Hi. Sorry, I was going to raise this on the next item, but as you've been talking about this sort of, you know, Mike Day perhaps mentioned as well, the situation that's recently occurred. I've been looking at the priorities that were set from 2023 to 2028, and obviously we are looking at vulnerable learners. I would ask the question, would we not consider, in the light of what's happened recently, whether one of our priorities should in fact be that all young people should feel safe and be safe? And I'm saying it in the context, as I say, that you've raised it now, whereas, you know, it is really to do with the priorities there.
Sorry, do you want me? I noticed Helen had her hand up. I didn't know she wanted to come in first, but yeah. So absolutely, I think that safeguarding is our core business. So you know, it's absolutely part of what we do, and it's part of our everyday work. I think, you know, we can certainly consider how we strengthen that within these priorities, but you know, we have to take very seriously those kind of scenarios that occur very unfortunately and very rarely, but nonetheless we have to be very clear we learn the lessons from those. There's obviously like a child practice review process that would be an important mechanism which we'll be part of to consider any elements that we need to do in terms of improving our own work in relation to that. But yes, absolutely, it's, you know, it's core fundamental business for us.
Right, thank you, Sandra. Do you want to come back? Yeah.
Yes, please. And I do understand that it underpins everything you do, but what it did make me think about was whether actually as a education directorate or as a corporate body, we should actually be putting that on our priorities when we've got 5 priorities, haven't we, for 23 to 28? Should that actually be one that's in there? I know it's implicit, but do we now, in the light of what's happening and it coming so much to the fore, do we make it more explicit?
Okay.
Yeah, we can take that back as part of the priorities and make sure it's really explicit how it weaves through every single one of those priorities, because absolutely that's, you know, totally fundamental to what we're doing. Yeah.
I think it's underpinned in all the strategies across the council, and I think that's. But I agree with you. It could be something that we could look at. So happy to look at that.
Thank you all. Helen.
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't sure if you could see my hand. Sorry, there's feedback. Is it my feedback? I can't hear. No?
Yeah, talk on that one.
Yeah. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah, so as Councillor Smith said, obviously our corporate plan has safeguarding as one of the top priorities for the whole council, and maybe it's not writ large in our Abertawe 28 kind of set of priorities, but it's not a document that cannot evolve during the course of that period of time. So as things change, and obviously these sad, newsworthy cases obviously do exercise our minds around how we'd recalibrate our priorities. And a good example of that is actually behaviours has become more of a priority than when we wrote Abertawe 2028. So there's room for us to keep it as a living document in terms of those priorities, and certainly we'll consider that.
Fine, thank you. I think it obviously, I appreciate that it weaves between every single thing that you do to keep children safe. But sometimes with this terrible occurrence that we've all been reading about, I think sometimes we might be ahead of the game if we actually featured it as a priority, as Sandra says. If there aren't any other, are there any other questions? No. Could I thank Kate? Really, really grateful for the report, very thorough report, and the work that you and colleagues are doing. So thank you very much indeed. It's much appreciated, and I'm pretty sure the children in Swansea will also appreciate what you've been doing on their behalf. Right, the next item on the agenda is the annual education performance against priorities. And we've got Councillor Robert Smith, you've got Helen, you've got Sarah, and Helen Howell. So who wants to kick off is the answer.
Well, if I can kick off and thank the two Helens and Sarah for bringing everything together and for the work that's gone into this. I think we present the report. It's a comprehensive account of the work of the Directorate going forward. It's identifying and taking forward the priorities of this administration. And I think there are some concrete achievements that we can talk about in this report. That's not to say that everything is done and dusted. That's never the case with the Education Directorate. As I said earlier, we're constantly responding to changing needs. We're constantly responding to developments in society, and I think that's reflected in some of the priorities and some of the work that's going on. But what I would say in this equally applies to what Kate was talking about earlier. It's about managing the day-to-day work of the Directorate alongside some of the big changes that are being made to respond to those needs. And we're in a period of change in a number of different topics here, and there was a report taken to Cabinet this morning. There's been a report taken to Cabinet, I think, if not the previous Cabinet meeting, the one before that. So, I mean, there are significant changes taking place and ongoing, and I think that's reflected in the work of a small team, but a dedicated team nevertheless, and thank them for all their efforts over the year.
Thank you, Robert. Helen's got a hand up. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Sarah's going to take us through the report. It's an extensive, almost 30-page report, and I'm hoping people have had a chance to read it before coming here this evening. But essentially, it does pay tribute to the delivery and progress that we've made over the course of the last academic year. I think what's important to note as well is that, as Councillor Smith said, we don't stand still. These are the priorities and objectives we've outlined for ourselves, but very often we get ones thrown at us as well from external sources. But I think it's really important for us not to just self-assess in isolation. I know Councillor Day raised that question a couple of years ago in terms of how we view ourselves. We do take on board the view of external partners, regulators, and indeed, more so, we're trying to work with our stakeholders, as we've already heard this evening. And part of our planning for this academic year is to hold ourselves to account by actually asking our schools for their opinions on the quality of delivery. So it's not just delivering against these objectives, it's how it's landing with our stakeholders in schools as well. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Helen. And Sarah, it's down to you now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As Helen's outlined, this is progress to the 23-24 academic year, so up to August. But as you've heard already in the meeting today, there's been quite a significant amount of progress since then. So there may be elements where colleagues might sort of top up perhaps some of the things that I've highlighted with some more recent progress. I just wanted to highlight as well before I start how we sort of RAG rate ourselves, because it's a slight change from last year. So we've changed this to a brag rating, and this is to bring us in line with how we report on the corporate plan every quarter. So it's just to make sure that there's consistency there. So what you're seeing in different reports is in alignment rather than us sort of having our own set of ratings there. So just to highlight really, so if it's blue, that action is complete and there's no further action on there. And then sort of green, we're on track. Amber, there's a sort of maybe minor delays, and then red is more significant delays or limited progress. So just when I'm referring to the colours there in the report, if I highlight that, then that just makes that clear there. So I will move on to the report itself and start, like last year, with the inclusion of progress against our ESTIN inspection recommendations from our inspection of local government education services in June 2022. So the first recommendation was around reviewing post-16 provision to ensure that it meets the needs of all learners. I know as a committee you've had this as a standalone item as well as being included in wider reports, and we have just completed the second year of a 3-year post-16 strategy. And so the detail is in the report there, but the overall outcome really of the second year is that there's been good progress against all objectives or priorities within that strategy, and the development really of strengthened strategic planning of post-16 and a strengthened sort of partnership working between different organisations, secondary schools, post-16 providers, FE colleges. This year now we're in the third year of that strategy, and alongside that is the development now of a designing destination strategy, which will be coming into force from September 2025, and that will take that work forward in terms of ensuring that our learners in schools have the skills they need to meet future opportunities in the area. So I'll just pause there, as I'm aware that there's potentially some further questions around post-16. So is there anything that anyone wants to raise at this point?
Right, I know, thank you very much, for that outline. I know Beth had submitted a number of questions, so Beth, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I'll just disclose that my day job is I'm a National Programme Manager looking at partnership working between education and health, particularly around mental health. So that's why I'm sort of got a few questions around this. So yeah, I think I've been working quite closely with the colleges, the universities, and I've just picked up that there's quite a lot of particularly transitioning between schools into FE into HE, and some of the well-being, the mental health stuff isn't transitioning with the learner, with the student. So I guess it's sort of, how is that being managed? What sort of forums? I mean, basically everything you were talking about, Kate, I would love to see that happening with the post-16s, because I'm just not confident that it is, I suppose. So yeah.
Chair, if I can come in and respond, is that okay?
Absolutely, Helen, yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Beth. They're very interesting. They've given us food for thought, and you're quite right to point out in terms of transition work, it seems to have sped up since the pandemic, and it's important for us to reflect really in terms of student welfare and well-being, and indeed the safeguarding considerations, that we have a joined up system in Swansea. So in response to your specific questions, one of the questions you asked about was the types of fora that exist around welfare and well-being and safeguarding. So obviously we have our Corporate Safeguarding Board as a council, but further to that we have the West Glamorgan Safeguarding Board, so considerations on specific issues around safeguarding are dealt with in those two fora. We also have an additional learning needs board in our education directorate, and we have multi-agency links and attendance and participation from the college as well. So that link there exists in terms of ALN specifically. But further to that, across the council, there's a Youth Justice Service Management Board, and also we have a NEETS Partnership Board. So there are various fora where these welfare and safeguarding considerations are dealt with, and specifically as well around transition planning around that. Then I think you were interested in data sharing protocols, and those have been strengthened over time as well. So we have, as a local authority, a data sharing protocol with Gower College, and also we have data that's passed between key personnel in Gower College and the local authority. And there's also a protocol in terms of individual specific data for individual learners that forms part of our youth progression framework. And that's managed by youth services in the council that don't happen to sit in education, but they are part of the council's work. In terms of our safeguarding processes, specifically between our schools in Swansea, in terms of compulsory age learners going on to the college, most of our schools have a system called My Concern, and that's used systematically across our schools to record all types of issues, can be in relation to behaviour, well-being. Gower College has also purchased this particular platform to receive this information, so that's really helpful that these platforms are talking to each other, and they're working to increase that compatibility in terms of the IT systems as well. So on top of that, that platform is one thing, but we do have members of staff from the college visiting our secondary schools to record a very sharp dialogue and precise dialogue to complement any information that's inputted into My Concern. And that's kept on a secure spreadsheet to ensure that we have that transition information, particularly around vulnerable learners, kept carefully and shared wisely. So Gower College employ a transition, more than one actually, transition officer to support young people, particularly vulnerable people with additional learning needs and mental health issues. Some of the questions that you asked in advance of the meeting were in relation to sixth forms and transitioning into HE, into higher education. As far as we know, each school has that responsibility for managing this where it's applicable, and schools build support into their tutorial programmes and signpost where applicable. So we haven't got any specifics around that, Beth. But we do have a greater kind of level of assurance around the transitioning between between schools and our FE, our college here locally. And in terms of high-level strategic planning, I'm guessing that's also in relation to welfare and safeguarding issues. We obviously have that strategic planning at a regional level around those safeguarding issues, but we do have an ALN strategic board in terms of our planning locally. So I guess that's probably it in terms of what we've been able to gather ahead of this meeting, Beth, but happy to have a further dialogue if required to furnish any further questions you have.
Beth, do you need to come back?
No, I think although they've purchased My Concern, that's not happening. And when I've spoken to that, when we went on the visit actually to the school we visited in the secondary school, they were saying that there is no way that they can communicate effectively with the colleges, with Gower College, to transition information about mental health safely at that point. And Gower College have basically said they feel like the schools are kind of, washing their hands of their students when they go over to them. So there is a disconnect there, which I appreciate. If Gower are going to get My Concern, that will help that. And I guess it's good that there's data sharing agreements in between the local authorities and the college. That's good to hear. But I wondered if health are also involved in that.
Okay. Right. Okay, fine. Thanks. And obviously, if you need further dialogue, you can get in touch with Helen as she'd offered. So thank you very much, Helen. Back to you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. And just to supplement some of what Helen was saying around the data, we are currently undertaking a review of data in line with our digital transformation programme. So there's certainly areas that we can look at in more detail. So more than happy to have a discussion and work with our data and information team to look at if there's anything we can support schools within that area. So please let us know. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. In terms of the next recommendation that was provided by
Councillor Smith's
Oh,
got hand up.
Oh, sorry, Robert, do you want to come in first?
Yes, sorry, sir. Just in relation to Beth's, not just the question that have been raised this afternoon, but I think the broader policy issue here. You know, I'm aware that there was work done a number of years ago about the transition arrangements from schools to FE, and I think the outcome then was that practice varied, and I think there was an emphasis put on identifying good practice. I think it's time, not necessarily confined to Swansea, that this is an all Wales issue, and I think it is probably time to look at the effectiveness of these arrangements. You know, as I said earlier, the needs have changed. We're dealing with different cohorts of learners. So I think it is a valid point, and it's something that probably needs a much broader look, but it's something that needs to be brought up in other fora as well as this, because it is a valid issue. Thank you, Chair.
Great, fine, thank you. Sarah?
Okay, so in terms of the second recommendation was around strengthening Welsh medium provision across all ages and areas of the local authority. In terms of working towards this recommendation, this is the work of our Welsh and Education Strategic Plan. That's a 10-year strategy that was approved by Cabinet in July 2022. And sitting underneath that, we have a 5-year delivery plan. So each year we report on progress to Welsh Government in July each year, so that aligns with this report. So in terms of the target set in the plan, so we met the upper level of the target range for reception age learners, and we were slightly below for preschool. So the provision in terms of what's on offer for preschool learners has increased in that time. So we are working with the early years team to look at you know, how we promote really the opportunities in Swansea. The number of learners registered for GCSE Welsh first and second language is at expected levels towards our 10-year target. In terms of transition rates, so Swansea has historically been very high in terms of transition. It's usually 98, 99% prior to the pandemic. We're now in the sort of mid-90s. There's a specific transition working group that is looking at this area of work specifically on how we can encourage and support families for children to move from primary into secondary Welsh medium provision. So there has been several transition activities taking place, but the impact of that has not yet been fully realised. So working further around that, the transition working group is widening its focus to look at earlier year groups and parents to support that sort of work at an earlier stage, really, whilst making decisions around moving into secondary education. In terms of second-year delivery of the WESP, there are a number of notable achievements that we've shared with Welsh Government, which we've detailed in the report. I won't go through them line by line, but you will see some areas that sort of align with perhaps the other recommendations. For example, a new opportunity to provide A-level second language Welsh has been promoted using ASCOs, or different mechanisms. So that's sort of linking with our post-16, but also looking at different ways we can consider the challenges around recruitment of suitably qualified Welsh-speaking staff. That's the biggest risk across the entire strategy, is ensuring that we have Welsh-speaking staff. So again, working with our partners to promote those opportunities for young people as well, who've undertaken Welsh medium education. So again, I'll just pause there before I move on to the main report to see if there are any questions around our Welsh language strategy.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions? No, can't see any hands up, and I haven't had any messages from Sandra, so the answer is no. You can carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next section of the report is progress against our key priorities. So these are the priorities outlined in the corporate plan. The academic year does span 2 financial years, which is how we report in the corporate plan. So what this annual report does is sort of pull together the work streams really across the 2 years and sort of group them really into sort of areas rather than the specifics. In terms of the first one, implementation of the inclusion strategy, unless anyone requests otherwise, I think Kate's just given a very thorough update on the inclusion strategy, which has taken us beyond the end of the academic year. So is everyone happy for me to sort of move straight through that one? But that has been brag rated, as you can see in the report. Just moving through the pages. Okay, just to really highlight and note in the report, there are 2 cameos in that report for you to consider and just to read. One is around an autism spectrum disorder myth-busting campaign, so really positive messaging really to families prior to diagnosis, but also the support that's available to our learners. And then the second one, a cameo around new ways of working to support vulnerable learners. So again, just wanted to highlight those are really positive news stories in terms of delivery of the inclusion strategy. So moving on to the next one is around Welsh language skills. Again, that's a standalone item in the corporate plan. Again, I've just given an update as it was an Estyn recommendation as well. So we've ragged that amber overall as there has been notable achievements, but there are some challenges as I sort of highlighted around sort of transition. We have a new WESP officer that is beginning with us on Monday, and their sole focus full time will be on the delivery of all of the different objectives of the WESP and ensuring pace really. So that will continue over this academic year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so next is around school leadership. So this overall is ragged green. So there has been, there's a range of opportunities in terms of development, career pathways and training offered for new and aspiring school leaders. And additionally to that, there's also support for school leaders in terms of, for example, self-evaluation. So it's, for example, equipping senior leaders with strategies to guide their teams in aligning self-evaluation with learner outcomes, so again, strengthening the role of school leaders. And there's a range really of programs and support from an individual level to group levels for school leaders and aspiring school leaders in Swansea. Additionally to that, we also have our leadership strategies in governors in schools. So we do have a school governance development action plan, and that's currently amber. There has been progress in terms of support that's given and also the Arweinwyr platform, but there's further work to fully realise that action plan.
Yeah, could I ask on these you put down as yellow here the provision of consistency of quality of school improvement advisors. We were in a stage a number of years ago where they were changing for schools on a far too regular basis. I think it may be before Robert and in fact Helen were in post, so it's going back quite a few years, even though we were obviously involved. What is the position with that now?
Thanks, Chair. It's a perennial issue. It's almost something we can't avoid as people leave, either through retirement or to gain employment elsewhere, to go back as secondees to their home school, or indeed to not be commissioned longer as the school improvement advisor, because we use a commissioning model in Swansea as well. So it's almost an inevitability, but what we try and mitigate is the impact of that on our schools. And try and reduce the number of changes any school has to encounter, but it's almost something that we can't avoid, unfortunately. Okay,
thank you for that. Sarah.
Thank you. So just to highlight again a cameo there around the professional learning offer and self-evaluation. So what I just noted at a very high level is some more detail in there for you to see. So the next priority is around teaching and learning, and particularly around the teaching support strategy to support literacy, numeracy and digital competency in schools. So there's a strong range of professional learning and support to schools, and that's led by a new lead officer for curriculum, learning and teaching. And there's been positive feedback received from schools around the support and training that has been received. There are action plans with schools about following literacy and numeracy audits, and that's sort of informed a universal offer for schools, but also tailored school support offered by specialists. In terms of the digital strategy, there is again a detailed action plan specifically for the digital strategy in terms of support for schools and professional learning, but also in terms of the infrastructure that's provided to schools. So in terms of the, for example, broadband speed and technical digital devices used by schools. Generally, there is a strong range of local and regional professional learning opportunities, and a high number of Swansea schools participate in inquiry-led projects. So overall, I think the training of in terms of the teaching and learning strategy is deemed to be strong.
Sorry, if I can come in, Chair, again, I'd like to put on record my thanks to the team leading on this. I think those of us who were at the recent STC meeting had a presentation on one aspect of this, and it's, as I said, it is one aspect of a very broad range of work that's gone on in that area as well. So once again, many thanks for the team, and I think it is impressive the way it's being led by directorate staff, but equally important is the commitment that's being shown by Swansea schools, by school leaders, by middle leaders and other practitioners across the school estate in Swansea. I think it's worth putting on record our thanks to them.
Okay, great, fine. Thank you, Robert. Sarah.
Thank you. And the next element there is around development of a design and destination strategy, and I highlighted that as part of the ESTIN progress. So the next section is around environments, and we have there a blue, so in terms of an approved strategic outline for the QED Sustainable Community Learning Programme, and that was endorsed by Cabinet in February of this year. And then next in that report is the capital delivery, and there's detail really around specific projects. So it's rated amber overall, but in there you will see sort of a variable in terms of what has been delivered and what has been delayed. So just there's some specifics there. I'm not sure if anyone wants to highlight anything in particular before I move on.
No hands up. You're okay.
Thank you. In terms of the special school, a strategic outline case has been submitted, and approval. Sorry, pausing there. So publication of statutory notice in terms of moving forward with that project. Apologies, I've stopped there.
Can I come in there, Chair, in terms of moving forward with our plans? Because I think in February I came to talk to you about the plans for the special school in February 2024. So since that time, obviously, the strategic outline programme for sustainable communities for learning went through Cabinet. Then it was submitted to Welsh Government for their approval, and subject to detailed business cases. That plan will go through now. So the next stage in terms of delivery is going out to tender. So we've waited for a new framework for contractors to be in existence before going out to tender. So that explains why nothing, well, I can't say nothing has happened, but there's been a lot of planning work in the background. But the next key milestone is to go out to tender for contractors.
Okay, great, fine. Thank you, Sarah.
Sorry if I can just come in.
Robert, sorry.
Yeah, because Helen Neely said it looks as if nothing has happened. Well, quite the contrary. It does look as if nothing has happened, but that doesn't take account of the immense amount of work that's gone into the planning, getting things ready, getting the schemes ready, making sure that we are in a position to start delivery. I mean, so to say, it may look as if nothing's happening, but believe me, a lot of things have been happening behind the scenes. I've been involved in some of the discussions, and again, the commitment that's been shown to getting these things delivered. There are obstacles, of course there are obstacles. We know of things, even bats are causing obstacles in certain instances. But I mean, these are all planning issues. There are issues around the capacity to deliver. There are issues, as you said, about the contractual framework. But let no one think that there isn't work going on, because there is a lot of work that's been going on, and it's again a tribute to the team.
Okay, great, fine, thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. In terms of the next work stream there around universal free school meals, so it's well notable here really that it was at the end of the academic year, it was rolled out to all year 5 learners, but it's now actually available to all learners. So that's fully embedded now. In terms of, so I noted earlier on around digital transformations, that also includes our catering and cleaning services, and ensuring the efficiencies there. And then finally, from this priority, the publishing of a new accessibility strategy. So at the point of August, that was developed in readiness for Cabinet in October 2024, but now again that has been agreed and is now a live strategy as schools are receiving further information resources in terms of writing their accessibility plans.
Yeah, could I ask something about the school meals? Obviously the free school meals, but the Children's Commissioner in her recent report said that 80% of children reported still being hungry after a school meal, and which is obviously quite serious. So I don't know, I haven't seen what the meal looks like, and I think I must do that shortly. But that's a huge figure, 80% of children saying they're hungry. And overall, the take-up was projected to be 86, and it's now down to 75, with children not taking it up again and bringing a packed lunch. Well, if we are having free school meals, we're either going to give something that's meaningful or not do it, really. But I think that is something that is obviously needs to be looked at. I don't know what the position is in Swansea, but what does the school meal look like? But this is what the Children's Commissioner is reporting.
Chair, I'm not sure whose hand up was first, but I'm going to dive in if that's okay.
Sorry, yeah. Go on.
In terms of quality and choice, it's something that we need to examine very carefully locally. We are cognizant of the national surveys that are being undertaken, and indeed some anecdotal evidence here in Swansea. So to do things systematically and thoroughly, we need to survey our learners ourselves locally, and that's going to happen in the new year. We have been waiting for a new framework to come out from the Welsh Government, but I don't think we can wait any longer in terms of ensuring that we've got a good level of evidence really in order to base our next set of menus and choices and preservation of quality of food and the health aspect of feeding children as well has to be preserved in Swansea.
And obviously the quantity of food as well, if they're going hungry. And 80% said they were going hungry.
Yes, and further
and that's
to that,
the Children's Commissioner saying it, not me, because I haven't seen the meal.
Yeah, I mean, these are young learners, we have to bear in mind, that have come on board recently with the universal free school meals for the primary sector. And we need to ensure that we keep waste levels down as well, because that's a consideration. You know, it's very topical at the moment because schools have to deal more with the separation of waste. So that's something that we have to ensure that we look at as well as part of our survey and evolution, really, in terms of the menu choices in Swansea.
Yeah, I think when you say about the evolution, about menu choices, probably the waste levels, that is probably down to part of that. Maybe the choices aren't right for those, and therefore people aren't eating them. And that might also go down part of the route to being hungry afterwards. but certainly grateful for your assurances on that you'll be looking at that, as I know you will, in Swansea. Thank you. Sorry, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah. So just moving on, there's a cameo again, just to note there really around the Kevin Hengoyd Community Hub project, and sort of all of the wider opportunities that provides, as well as delivering the project itself, and a cameo around the accessibility strategy that provides some more details. I just really want to note those positive stories there. So I'm at the end in terms of progress against priorities. I'll just pause there quickly to see if there's anything anyone wants to add at this stage.
Any questions, anyone? No, I don't think so.
Okay,
You can carry on.
Thank you. So for this section now, I'm going to pass over to Helen Howells. This is the update on elective home education, and then I'll come back in after that in terms of the data update there.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So in terms of elective home education, I think it's first important to note that everything that we do within education to support learners who are educated at home is laid out in law, and we're governed by that legislation. Welsh Government have recently reviewed their guidance, and that was in October 2023. And I think the first thing we can do is really put down that definition of what elective home education is. And it is a term used to describe when parents educate their children at home instead of sending them to school. There's a lot of confusion around what home tuition is and what elective home education is. But home tuition is our offer in Swansea, and those children remain on part of a school role. But in terms of elective home education, the education is delivered by the parents. So in Wales, education is compulsory, but attending school is not always. If a child is home educated, there is an obligation on the parents, as I just mentioned, to ensure their child receives what is deemed as efficient and suitable full-time education. So parents who decide to electively home educate their children must be prepared to assume that full responsibility, and it does have financial implications. So our team in Swansea is our elective home education team, and these lovely people make arrangements to establish the identities of the children in the area who are of compulsory school age and are educated at home. So the difference with home education, obviously, is it can be individualised and it can be bespoke, and it's not governed by normal school hours. Welsh Government guidance does outline the expectations on the local authority to ensure those initial visits, a 3-month visit and at least one annual visit, is undertaken to assess the education being provided and making sure that it is that efficient and suitable for learners. So it's good to note then that in the past we've always met Welsh Government averages for visits. But this academic year, we know already that we'll be exceeding that average. So we're really pleased with the way our EHE team are working at the moment. We provide monthly updates to Welsh Government and a more in-depth annual report so that this can be scrutinised and trends recognised. One thing that's really important is that our team recognise that the customs practices and standards in school-based education are not necessarily relevant to home education. Therefore, all their advice is based on those individual circumstances. So I've put in a table there to show the increase in EHE, which, as you can see, there is a rise. We had the sharpest increase in rise in 2023, but that data aligns with our national trends. We know that across Wales in 2024, there were nearly 6,000 children of statutory school age known to be home educated, which is a 22% increase on the year before. And just as to give context to where we are in Swansea, out of the 22 local authorities, we have the 6th highest number of children educated at home, which is above both the mean and median average. And some of the reasons that families are given to home educate very much align to Welsh Government reasons around this. school-based anxiety, attendance or school refusal. So if they've got low attendance or school refusers, and sometimes the belief that school is not meeting the needs of the child. So because of these rising numbers, I think what we had to do is respond really swiftly to this, because we recognised that while there was an increase in numbers of learners who are being educated at home, the number of learners with ALN increased also, and because of the statutory implications of the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal Act, or the ALNET, it required EHE learners with ALN to have that. Sorry, there's lots of acronyms here. To have that individual development plan, and I was going to say IDP, but I gave it a rest with the acronyms, which must be reviewed and monitored at least annually. So we realised that was a problem. We realised it was a risk and did respond really, really quickly. So we've got a really good and robust action plan in place to make sure that statutory duty is undertaken. So to date, what's been achieved is we've massively reduced the capacity in the team. So we have one teacher in charge or lead EHE officer. What's really, really important to us is that we've got an EHE Additional Learning Needs Coordinator, or ALNCO, so we could respond to those needs really, really quickly. We've got one full-time equivalent EHE advisor and an EHE teaching assistant who's coming on board with us in January. So we feel that will robustly respond to those increased in numbers and the increase in need and those changing needs of our children who are educated at home. The EHE policy and parent guidance has been revised in line with all Welsh Government guidance. There's been additional home visits undertaken, drop-in sessions and events arranged. I think it was just last week there was a post-16 conference for particularly for elective home education community, which was really well attended. And we've managed to develop and maintain links with other really good and important teams, as you can read there, from social services, within education and beyond. Future developments then, what we want to do is to be able to support qualifications and post-16. That's really, really important to us, and we're currently in talks with Gower College to be able to provide some support in terms of where the children can sit their GCSEs, and hopefully that one might be at a reduced cost to them, to the parents. So we're really pleased with that. We want to enhance our data collection and make sure that we are scrutinising that to identify all our trends. We want more opportunity for learner voice. We have our conferences, we have our drop-in sessions, but what we want to do, as Kate said earlier, is in terms of the voices that we want to hear those quiet voices. We want to hear from the children we don't always see. So that's really important for us. We want to continue to refine and develop our policies and procedures for all our ALN learners who are electively home educated, and we want to develop new ways to communicate with our families. We've also introduced an EHE panel which considers actions for our hardest to reach families, which is really important to us. So just to summarise then and to sum up, we've noted the challenges, we've seen the risks, and we hope we've responded swiftly enough to be able to be well placed moving forward to support all our learners. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for that report, very thorough report on this issue. Any questions? I've just got one while past people are thinking, two actually. I always think, you know, with school, it wasn't just about getting exam results and so on. It's the whole experience where it's probably many of us, we all made friends in school. I've got friends for life, and it's how you mix with friends and how you mix with other people who aren't your friends. I think it's all about that school experience. And I think, you know, by being educated at home, people lose that, and it could make you more nervous later on in life. Because you haven't had to mix and have the rough and tumble, if you like, and the great experiences we've all had at school. that was my concern. When we talk about home visits, do you make an appointment or do you appear? Because very often, if you make an appointment, it could all be planned for the visit rather than somebody just turning up, which is probably more effective, even if they wouldn't be there. But I think that way you could see what is actually going on, not actually having an appointment and having this. I'm sure it doesn't happen in many cases, but it could happen. And the other fact is, what are the exam results for the people who take exams on home medication? So really those three sort of points really, but thanks for the report.
Are you happy for me to come back in?
Yeah, please,
Lovely.
if you can. Yeah, great.
Thank you. So for your first question, I agree with you. I think the opportunity to mix is really, really important. And obviously, whatever we do and however we support that, it's going to be in a different way to within that school environment. And we absolutely understand that. Within the home education community, there are lots of groups. And there are some things that are organised themselves within that community. What we're trying to do is to encourage relationships with the local authority and the community. So we are going to outside providers. For example, Swansea City, they do a really good programme, and they try and work with elective home educated learners as well as other different external providers. So that is something that we're trying to do to encourage those socialisation activities. I think your second question was around visits. Yes, there is an element of cold call. We do have some instances where officers will just turn up, and that happens quite regularly. I think what we're trying to do all the time, though, is build that relationship so that we have that really good connections with our home educated community. So we always prefer to have that discussion beforehand, but there are occasions where we do cold call. And in terms of your last question around exam results, I'm going to be quite honest and say we don't track exam results in elective home education. We don't really, that's not part of our Welsh Government data. But what we'd like to do going forward is be part of that journey for our elective home educated learners. And if that means, looking at exam results and helping them move on, then that's exactly what we'll be doing. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Helen. Beth.
Thanks, Helen. It sounds like you're doing a heck of a lot with a recent team. So well done with that. I just kind of wondered, do you track sort of why people don't want their kids to go into school, and I guess where sort of inclusion ends and homeschooling starts, really?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. Whenever we have that information that a child wants to be, or a family has requested elective home education, there's always an initial visit done with our lead officer, and that is explored thoroughly. And if necessary, there are challenges to the school in order to support that child. We've been quite successful in our children from elective home education returning to school in the last couple of months. So we're really, really pleased with that, and we're hoping to continue as much as possible, because we do recognise that school is the safest and best environment for our learners.
Okay, great, fine, thank you. Just looking, anything else you need to add, Helen, or no?
No, thank you, that's great.
That's great, fine. Any questions for Helen? No? Well, can I say thank you very much? Very thorough, very interesting report as well, and good for us to reflect on those points, and that we're doing the right thing with regard to home education as well. And so thanks for the work that you're doing. Right. The next, I think the final point on this is that Helen, that's the other Helen Morgan-Rees, Helen was going to give the panel a short verbal update on the changes to partneriaeth.
Thank you, Chair. So Cabinet this morning has approved a plan to move from a legal agreement in terms of our collaboration as 3 local authorities to a less formal collaboration agreement, which means that the levels of governance that were in the legal agreement will essentially disappear. That's not to say that there won't be any governance. There will be governance, but on 1 tier rather than a 3-tier system. So the informal scrutiny group across the region will now disappear. The joint committee will disappear. And as well as reducing the governance as part of the new collaboration agreement, there will be a reduced level of cost involved in terms of the running costs and the office costs of running a region. So this reflects a change really in terms of how the workforce in Partneriaeth has been reduced. So in line with that reduction in workforce, we've now done away with a lot of the time and resource required to run a larger team. So the team is less than 20. Whereas in times of old it's been as high as 50 something. So we've tried to reduce it, but it also reflects the nature of funding streams coming to local authorities now rather than going to consortia in Wales. So that allows us to commission to the level that we want to commission to as a local authority. So Swansea Council has chosen to continue to work with its partners in Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, but on a much reduced scale.
Great, thank you, Helen. I think less bureaucracy and less cost is always good news, and less meetings are always good news as well, because you can get on with the job. Even if I'm out of a job, because I chaired the regional partnership, the regional scrutiny group, that's good news in that sense. But I think it is equally important that we now get Partneriaeth to come direct to Swansea scrutiny, so that we can question Partneriaeth, because I think that is an important element of that. And I can see Mike Day's got his hand up.
Yeah, I think you've actually answered the question I was going to ask about the scrutiny arrangements in future, Lyndon, but if it's done through this particular committee, that'll be great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. No, I think it is important that we have that opportunity to question what they're doing. I know the cost is less and everything else, but they are still undertaking work on behalf of 3 councils and certainly on behalf of us in Swansea. So I think it's important that we do speak to them. So great, thank you for that.
Yeah, if I could come in, Chair, I mean, again, thank Helen for the report went through Cabinet this morning. There have been various iterations of regional consortia and regional working over the years, and I think it's responded to the needs of local authorities, the needs of schools as they were developing. Some of us remember Swamwac, then became Aero, then we had Partneriaeth. They've all undertaken different roles in different circumstances. What I think this gives us is, based on the principle of subsidiarity, that we've got local control, we've got a model that meets our needs. It retains that element of collaboration, but with each authority in the driving seat. And I think where we are now, this is the model that we need. And I'm confident that it will meet the needs for as long as they are what the needs that we're facing at the moment, Chair.
Great, thank you, Robert. I think I haven't heard subsidiarity mentioned for a couple of years, so it's all good.
Remember that word, yeah.
In it, just gosh. But no, I think obviously we've got to. I was there at the death of Eru, and gosh, we were almost. I think everybody was pleased to put it out of its misery. Because it was very, very costly. The only problem is millions of pounds have probably been spent on them in the meantime in getting back to what is a system now that looks very workable. And certainly the current model with the work that Partneriaeth are doing are very good with the local councillors in the driving seats in the main. And that I think is a good model for that. Right. The final item on the agenda is the work programme. And has anybody got any questions on that? There's a hand up, Mike.
Yeah, so just a comment. I think probably we were all a bit disappointed to read the outcome of the Estin inspection for Morriston, and I wondered whether we should be including that in the work programme, before the end of the academic year, or our civic year rather.
Okay, yeah, no, we can certainly look at that, Mike, and include that. Yes, certainly.
See how we might help and assist.
Yeah, no, I think. Oh, we got Helen coming in. Yeah, there we are, Helen.
Yeah, oh, sorry. Just wondering for consistency whether we should consider the other secondary school we've got in follow-up as well, Dylan Thomas Community School. So that's currently in follow-up and it's probably reached the 6-month mark in terms of being in Eston follow-up. So maybe we should be considering that school as well.
We have it down, I think, in the work programme, meeting 9, isn't it, Dylan Thomas? But
oh, it's there. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, we're meeting Dylan Thomas on the 20th of March.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, but we could certainly, do something around Morriston, because that's obviously an important catchment area. Although all schools have got important catchment areas. But great, thanks. Any other questions on the programme? We'll look at putting that in. Helen, is that historical hand, or is it you? No, right, that's fine. And finally, could I say thank you all. I hope you have a lovely Christmas and Happy New Year. We'll meet up next in January. And could I thank Michelle for all the work she's done during the course of the year?
Well done, Michelle.
And also to members of the panel, because I think we've covered quite a lot in the last year. So thank you. Thanks to Michelle, and also to Helen and to Robert, because I do speak to people involved with scrutiny of education in other councils, and the cabinet member and director of education don't take the same interest in it, and we're lucky to have both of them attend and a part of the scrutiny process, a part of that process while we scrutinise education. So thank you as well, and I'll see you in the new. Well, I might see some of you next week, but I'll see you all soon as a panel.
Nadolig Llawen.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.